Welcome back into the Play-by-Play, a sports media talk show from Awful Announcing, where unlike Jonathan Vilma, we will not force a 6-7 joke into the proceedings today. I'm Brendon Kleen. That's Drew Lerner. We're back. We're live. It's Monday, November 10th, and Donald Trump is in the news. In the sports news. He's always in the regular news, but we are going to dive into Trump's eventful appearance on the NFL on Fox's broadcast of Commanders-Lions from Washington on Sunday. We'll also get to our hot mics covering a strange ongoing NFL media debate and the strange saga of papaya gaming. I hope you don't know what that means. Hit subscribe, hit follow wherever you're getting us. We are live here for you on YouTube 3 times a week at 2 p.m. Eastern. And we are also on all audio podcast platforms, so follow along on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen. All right, Drew. So this kind of came up last second in terms of Trump's appearance on this Fox NFL broadcast Sunday. We've known for a bit that Trump has been involved in the Commanders' negotiations for a new stadium. Anytime there's an opportunity for Trump to participate in some sort of sports situation as president, he tends to take that opportunity. And of course, this is right in his backyard in Washington, where the Commanders are trying to build a new stadium on the grounds of the old RFK Stadium, where they used to be good. And maybe that'll be the thing that turns things around for them. And then all of a sudden he's about to appear. He wants the stadium named after him. And all of a sudden now he's on our TVs. And that is sort of how quickly it all came together from the standpoint of how we all received it as viewers. He was at this game because it is the Salute to Service weekend with Veterans Day on Tuesday, and he was there to participate in an enshrinement or whatever you want to call it of the new military members on field at halftime. There's a lot of things that were said. There's a lot of things that people reacted to. Whatever. It's always like that when politics and sports kind of collide here, Drew. But just from like a programming and decision-making standpoint, putting your like Fox executive hat on here, what did you think, or I guess maybe like a rival executive hat on more aptly, like what did you think of how Fox chose to handle this and just the kind of table setting and the dressing up of the interview before we get to what was said?
Yeah, I thought it was an interesting editorial decision, right? Like, I think, recently when Trump has attended sporting events, the broadcaster will, show him a few times even during the event, mention he's there, say that it's, unique to have a sitting president in attendance, that sort of thing. Not often have we seen that president actually interviewed like we saw in the booth on Fox yesterday. I think the closest example we have in recent history would be when Trump, at halftime of the most recent national title game, college football, the day of his inauguration, gave a pre-taped little speech. I think it was like a minute or two during halftime of ESPN's broadcast of that. Beforehand, you have to go all the way back to 2009 when Fox interviewed Barack Obama in the booth for the MLB All-Star Game. And a year prior to that, George Bush joined ESPN on a Sunday Night Baseball broadcast. That is per Brian Stelter of CNN. So not completely unprecedented to have the president in a booth, but it's certainly not common, and it hasn't happened in 16 years. And I'm sure everyone listening to this podcast would eagerly admit this country is a lot different politically now than it was 16 years ago. So, yeah. The optics of having a sitting president interviewed during a live game broadcast is certainly different now than it was in 2009, the last time this happened.
So I guess the George Bush Sunday Night Baseball thing would be the most comparable because it was a regular season affair, correct? So like in this interview with Kenny Albert and Jonathan Vilma, whose names I don't think I've said yet, they were the announcers who participated. I mean, I made fun of Vilma at the top, but they, you know, this was they said in the interview that this was the first time a sitting president had even attended an NFL regular season game, at least, for whoever's keeping track of these things, since 1978. I believe it was Jimmy Carter. So, that in and of itself is fairly historic and is an indication of how much Trump not only has involved himself with sports, but I would say even more like consistently. I mean, aggressively sounds weird because there's nothing like harmful about it, but like he's been very present in sports this term, even compared to the last term. It's disruptive, right? Like, I think that at the very minimum, just people who care about this game, it's just not really what you want to watch. And it was an entire Commanders scoring drive. I mean, the game kind of sucked, and nobody really is that concerned with what Marcus Mariota does with Washington the rest of the season now that Daniels has gone down. But like, it is still a game that people are watching, and it's incredibly disruptive to it. I think that that's kind of my main criticism, as maybe like tiny as it can seem, is that part of it, for it to go on so long. And then also for, like, I don't know who those people were in those other situations. The All-Star game would make me think it was a higher profile of announcer. I don't know about who was calling Sunday Night Baseball when George Bush would have gone on. But Kenny Albert and Jonathan Vilma are really low down on the pecking order of Fox's broadcast booth. And that's not to say anything about how they call an NFL game. I mean, they're getting the honor of getting to call the international game next week. I think people think relatively highly of them, especially Albert, who's a very prolific broadcaster. But typically these things, if you're talking about the Super Bowl, the customary annual Super Bowl pregame interview that takes place, that's been taped for many years as a tradition now, or any other, Sage Steele, the lawsuit and some of the things she talked about with interviewing the president. It's anchors, it's reporters, it's people who have experience covering hard news, going back and forth with people who have power. And even if it's a coach, for instance, frankly, like Kenny Albert and Jonathan Vilma are just like, there's media critics who don't think the top reporters at these news networks do a good job of interviewing Trump or any other president, let alone these guys. And so you can say it put them in a bad position. You can criticize them. I just think if I'm Fox, can this be at halftime with, Kurt Menefee? Can this be a Fox News anchor? I mean, I know people would probably have had an issue with that too, but like, at least they're, Brett Bayer's like a guy who does this. Can you put something out there with him? Maybe it's, I don't know. That was the part that I really, because I mean, the Jonathan Vilma joke with the 6'7" stuff was one thing, but like, this was a softball of all softballs. And I just think, to your point, like the temperament of the country right now, it's just not the time and place to have a former linebacker who's never done this kind of thing be asking the president, how's the country looking right now, Mr. President? Like, are we naive? Are we just putting our heads in the sand? Like, come on.
Yeah, and I think we should be clear because, I don't want to run a truck over Jonathan Vilma and Kenny Albert for doing this. They were conducting this interview for an audience of one, and that audience was Lachlan Murdoch. Like, they wanted to make their boss happy. They were not concerned with, having a news-making interview or even an interview that, would please, the masses watching the game. I think their biggest concern was, like, they just wanted to come off good for the sake of their corporate parent, right? And I think it's fair to say this type of interview would never have happened on any other broadcast network other than Fox. And we know how deep the relationship between Fox and the Trump administration goes. If you look at Trump's administration now, it would take multiple hands to count how many former Fox News anchors and reporters and whatnot are part of that that cabinet and that administration. So it's no surprise that this happened on Fox, but I'm not going to blame Kenny Albert and Jonathan Vilma for doing what they did, because that was probably the directive they were given. How else are you supposed to conduct this interview? I think where it went wrong, to your point, is how long it took. This was a 9-minute interview. It was a whole scoring drive for the Commanders. I'm sure going in, they thought, we'll have him on for one drive. Hopefully it'll be a quick drive. Because then,
and having it be a Washington drive was a safe bet. It would be short, but then all of a sudden they score, and you're stuck. Yeah,
exactly. And so, originally it's not actually a terrible interview, right? You're asking him about his high school football days, and you're asking him football questions. You're having him call a play for whatever reason. Where it strays off is when you ask him questions where he can actually discuss politics. And I know we've had many discussions about the stick to sports crowd on this podcast and on our website. But, I think we can throw all of that out the window now, right? Like, there is no argument for stick to sports when you're bringing the president of the United States on to talk about, things like grocery prices during an NFL game. And in the background, there's a months-long government shutdown happening. So, I don't know. Vilma and Albert were in a very tough position.
Yeah.
But you should know that when you have President Donald Trump on, there's not much you can do to stop him from talking about what he wants to talk about. He's a master of the media. And I think this goes into a greater point, which I'd like to get into, is that I think the reason Trump has become so active in attending these sporting events is because Trump realizes sports is media in a lot of ways, especially these days when, the only time large amounts of people are gathering around their televisions at any one time are to watch live sporting events. And so by co-opting all of these large sporting events, like he has done with, the US Open, the FIFA Club World Cup, he's going to host a UFC event on the White House lawn. These are all moments that Trump can make about himself that would previously not have been normal media moments for a sitting president. But alas, this is just another way that he's kind of expertly, manipulated the media to cover him, even when it's not really about him.
It's fascinating. One part of it, I think that's a great point, and it's true. I mean, we say it in so many other walks of this industry where it's Netflix needs sports because that's the one live event that matters. And, of course it would apply to somebody with the bully pulpit of the presidency who wants to conglomerate as many eyeballs as possible. Why would you not carry that same motivation forward? But I think the part of it, though, that comes off that surprises me, or that has surprised me as he's gone through all these, right, is you mentioned the US Open, which I think was one of the more interesting media stories of this new Trump administration, which really includes last year's campaign and his even more all-encompassing inclusion into the sports landscape, is that they wanted broadcasters to not shoot and air the reaction that he got when he was introduced at Arthur Ashe Stadium, right? And ESPN notably didn't really honor that, but it was typical, some boos, some claps, and everybody moved on. I don't think it's really as sensational as it was in 2015-16 when the existence of him as president was worthy of a reaction. We're just not really there anymore. But I thought that was interesting, right? Where it's at least an attempt to try to tamp down what you're talking about, which is just the freneticism around him being at this thing. Let's just ignore it almost and try to not I don't know if it was them not trying to give him what he wanted or them just trying to stay out of it. And obviously this was the USTA and they're not even a media company, but whatever. I thought that was interesting and maybe a version of where this could be headed if companies want to avoid something like this in the future. But the other part of it, though, that I think we haven't seen that I thought we would have is, yesterday he's at Northwest Stadium. He's in this Commanders game and people boo him. Right. And pretty that always goes viral, and he doesn't comment on it. it feels like whereas like if you look at conservative media, like I saw a clip from Sean Spicer's podcast, which congrats to him for having one, where he's like, this is so disrespectful for people to, and that it's kind of the direction that I feel like the conservative media wants to take things like this, which is to create it as a sign of disrespect. If you didn't like Trump being on Fox, you're not a patriot, you're disrespectful, whatever. But Trump hasn't done that. And that kind of surprises me, just kind of given how much he also likes to play those things up. Oh, they treat me poorly, this and that. He loves to say stuff like that. And in this case, he kind of hasn't. I don't know if it's because it's actually not as negative as some of these clips make it look, where the boos really aren't even that big of a thing and he maybe doesn't even notice it or care, or he just thinks that it's winning, that his plan is working no matter what the reaction is, just by participating and being around these types of events.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that's the type of thing that obviously, like, it plays well to his base, and then maybe he goes on Truth Social or whatever and gripes about it. But I don't think it's something, and I think even he realizes this, that plays well to the masses. And that's kind of those are the people you have to win over to, continue to have a mandate over government, right? There was just recently an election last Tuesday that didn't go so well for the Republicans. So, maybe he's cognizant of making himself into too much of a fool. But I think it's funny, like, if you go back into that interview when Vilma was making the 6'7" joke, like moments later, Trump talked about how, he admitted that he never scored a touchdown in high school, and then said, well, because I'm willing to admit that, that means I would never lie. It's so tongue in cheek. Like he almost acknowledges that, of course he is full of, lies on a regular basis.
Yeah. But I think that speaks to what you're kind of saying too, of that Fox just put those guys in such a bad spot. It's like, what do you say?
Right.
How do you keep the interview going? What kinds of things are you even supposed to ask once you get past the prepackaged photo of him in high school and some of the kind of niceties and everything? It just sort of peters out, and that's when he takes over.
Yeah, and that to me is just where this all went wrong. It's like, all right, well, once you get past all the niceties and, doing the high school football career and, thanks for coming to the NFL game, we're glad to have you. And, maybe you even touch on the stadium stuff, because that is relevant to, the Commanders fans that are probably watching that game disproportionately to everyone else in the country. Sure. After that, all right, we're done here. Like, let's wrap it up and let's just start calling the game normally again. I think what happened was, Albert and Vilma, this is where you can fault them. They just got lost in the moment. They didn't really know how to wrap things up, and then they let the interview get away from them. I think that's kind of where you'd be able to fault them. But again, it's like they don't have any experience doing this stuff.
Yeah, it's if it's like a blame chart, it's 85% Fox executives for agreeing to this and putting it on, and maybe 15% on those guys for not being prepared for what to do if this happened. But again, like, easy for me to say, how awful I'd look if I was interviewing Donald Trump. I couldn't even begin to do a good job at that. And it's like, yeah, so great. I can make fun of those two for being a little bit, rusty or whatever, but okay. So is anyone who's ever tried to interview this guy, outside of like one or two interviews that have actually looked like a loss for him. So yeah, this is just what happens.
Yeah. It's strange. And, I think it's notable that, this interview only, I just got the word from Fox. This went out to 30% of the country. Most of the country was receiving the Rams 49ers game at the same time. And I think it's intentional on Fox's part not to have advertised this. Obviously, they knew it was going to happen. They had production elements prepared for the interview.
Yeah.
I don't know when they would have known it was happening, but if they knew earlier in the week, then this was a very intentional move not to have promoted this at all. And I think part of that is because they probably wanted to keep it under wraps and not, have a whole media circus around it. B, they know their announcers that they're kind of putting them in a bad spot by doing this. And, C, it could have gone kind of sideways like it did. So
it could have also gone way worse than it did, to be honest. I think really there's not like a certain viral clip. I honestly think the Vilma thing is one of the most viral parts that I've seen going around the internet, is him goofing around with the 6'7" meme. And that is harmless. No, that's not going to make anyone really look bad. Ultimately, it's just kind of a bad joke. But I guess like where I don't know where I really see any of this stuff going. I think it's a safe bet that Trump will continue to be very involved in the sports scene throughout the remainder of this term. I feel that, we already have seen some kind of manipulation of the Super Bowl halftime show and Bad Bunny being selected there, and his, anti-ICE comments being held up and then reacted to by conservative media, and then the threats of ICE being present at the Super Bowl. Like, any red meat opportunities for this administration around sports, because of how core it is, like you said, Drew, to our kind of whatever mass culture is left that isn't like an Aiden Ross stream. Like, Trump had to kind of break into these weird little fractured things during the campaign. Sports are this place where everybody's paying attention. I think that they'll continue to go after it. We have the World Cup here next year. We have the Olympics in 2028. This is a sports-filled term. No matter who had won, it would have been a very high-profile live sports in America moment and opportunity to seize. And then you do things like the UFC match and whatever, which are just being added to this very full pot. And, I'm not going to sit here and predict what the headline's going to be or how those are all going to go down, but the president's going to be front and center for all those things, as you would expect. And we're just going to have to see how, sports figures react to it. And is there ever a boiling point where we go back to, the woke stick to sports versus stick to sports people, and that debate comes back, or some new version of it? I mean, I just think that this is going to keep building, and people are going to have to respond to it.
Yeah, and I think to your point, I'm actually going to walk back a point I made just a few minutes ago. I do think there's a possibility that other networks would have actually done this, especially when you consider CBS's new ownership and who is now the editor-in-chief at CBS News. They've definitely taken a rightward shift and have done things to appease the administration. And then, of course, if you look at other media companies, they've settled lawsuits with Trump. They're trying to be favorable towards the administration to get deals done. You could look at Comcast potentially as being one of those potential, trying to get on Trump's good side, thinking that they might want to bid for Warner Brothers Discovery. So, I guess there are avenues for this to happen on other networks.
And I just think too, the reality is the support for him is far greater just politically than it was last time around. I think it's more palatable for, let's say, like a commentator or reporter. Like, there would have been backlash against Jonathan Vilma and Kenny Albert for quote unquote agreeing to this if we rewind 10 years, right? If Trump had done this in 2016 and it had been Fox and whatever, even participating, these people would have had to come out and defend themselves, or gotten into it in some freaking Instagram comment fight. It's not to say that stuff doesn't still happen, but it's far less provocative or polarizing for these two announcers to participate than it was. And so I think just some of the cultural climate is just way less tense on this topic than it was once upon a time. So yeah, maybe other networks, certainly other commentators would have been more than happy. I'm sure whatever happens with this UFC fight on the White House lawn is going to be a media circus, and that's CBS, as you mentioned. There's going to be more and more of it. All right. Much to continue to cover. We are only, of course, 10 months into the administration, and I mentioned all those events that are coming up, but that'll wrap our conversation for the day. Let's close out the show, Drew, with Hot Mic, something that we liked, we disliked. Maybe we just want to shout out from the week that was in sports media. I'll go first keeping on the NFL, Pro Football Focus. I don't think we've actually discussed this debate on the show, but it's been something we've covered at awfulannouncing.com quite a bit. And Pat McAfee returned to it at the top of hour 2 of his show on ESPN right before we went live here on the play-by-play, where he continues to criticize the presence of these Pro Football Focus rankings on Sunday Night Football in particular. Just the existence of PFF, I understand, is kind of the bane of these players' existence in some way, because it ranks them against their counterparts so straightforwardly. It's literally telling them you're all-encompassing. You are the 8th worst at what you do. Like, that doesn't feel good. But particularly the presence on NBC Sports Sunday Night Football broadcast, because Chris Collinsworth is the owner of the company and the color commentator for the game. And last night, I guess the entry point for McAfee was this clip that went viral where the Chargers offensive line, it was like 36th out of 38, 38th out of 38, whatever, like, because they suck at their offensive line's bad. It's been a storyline the whole season. And I just wonder how you feel about it, Drew, the idea of making these analytical things that fans may not understand and, that players might not like, such a core focus of the introduction and the table setting of Sunday Night Football every week.
Yeah, I think that's where it kind of there's an issue. Is like, why are these numbers right under a player like introducing themselves and saying, "Hey, I'm from the University of Alabama. Also, I'm the 86th best cornerback in the league." Like that.
Yeah, exactly.
That to me doesn't make sense. I've only really followed the broad strokes of this debate, and what confuses me is like, I come from a Steelers fan's perspective, and I see a lot of discussion about like how TJ Watt is always like rated way too low in PFF because like he doesn't have, a high win rate or something, or, what I don't understand, like, are these rankings like predictive at all? Because I think if they're not predictive, then they should go, because, well, I don't know. It's like too linear of a system, right? Like, I don't think there's any fair way to grade people by position, because football is such a unique sport in the sense that every movement, every play call, all 10 other people on the field, or 21 other people on the field, honestly, impacts like what one person is doing on any given play. So how you go about grading whether or not someone did their job or did not do their job, I think is just like a really big ask, and I don't think it's going to be all that helpful, even if you do like try to build out stringent criteria, as I understand PFF tries to do.
You said that you've only followed the broad strokes. I mean, I think that is a lot of the player and former player argument is, people call football the ultimate team sport, and I think you can make a case that it is American football. And like, I think that, even like those Chargers offensive linemen, it's like, well, when Joe Alt's not in, the rest of them get worse, just as far as step one goes. And then, at this point, I think like all those guys are backups who are playing there. So what are you really communicating to a fan by telling them like, hey, all these backups who have never played together and had to come in mid-season are playing poorly? Well, yeah, it doesn't necessarily communicate something that just like storytelling wouldn't communicate. And I feel like if you were to just rank the reasons that NBC is probably putting it up there, advertising for its color commentators company is probably really high on that list. And if that's true, then that should tell you something about if it's worth moving forward with. But I don't think it's going to stop. I do think that it is somewhat useful to contextualize athletes in a holistic way for fans to kind of understand how good or bad somebody is. We try to do that in all sorts of sports, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But yeah, could you like Collinsworth's argument is like every coach or player that he's brought in to show them this, how they operate, where they track things and try to assign responsibilities and the success rate according to those responsibilities and everything else, that they always are kind of convinced by the time that he's done meeting with them. And he's like, all the other game analysts use this stuff, even if you don't realize it. It's like, that's well and good, but none of the other games introduce a player with that label. And I think if they stop doing that, that would go a long way. And just, hey, so-and-so just let up a sack. So far this season, he has been the 18th of 25 left tackles. Seems like he's struggling again today, and keep it moving. And that would be helpful context, but not, my name is John Smith from the University of, Michigan, and I suck at football. Welcome to Sunday Night Football.
That's what it feels like. And I think the grades are probably directionally correct enough where you could like incorporate it into like a game call. Like, all right, you're breaking down a play, the left tackle blows his assignment, and then you go and say, hey, yeah, he's like the 31st, best left tackle.
Maybe even throw a graphic up there during the replay.
Exactly. That seems like a lot more of a reasonable use of it than having every single player's grade under them as they're introducing themselves. Yeah, that just kind of seems silly.
All right. Yours to wrap us up here.
Yeah, so mine real quick is this whole gambling, papaya gaming, solitaire cash app scandal that has kind of taken on a life of its own over at ESPN. To quickly catch people up, last week, Stephen A. Smith endorsed an app called Solitaire Cash. It turns out that the owner, the company of that app called Papaya Gaming, has been found by a court to have defrauded customers by placing bots into games that were purportedly only being played in by human users. Those bots could control whether these human users won or lost, and thereby controlled whether or not real people were winning or losing money. A day or two after Stephen A. Smith became the official spokesperson for this app, several other high-profile ESPN personalities kind of latched on, also did social media campaigns endorsing the app. This would include Mina Kimes, Dan Orlovsky, Laura Rutledge, and Kendrick Perkins. And pretty much just to be blunt about it, none of these personalities vetted this company to see if they were actually like above board. So we went ahead and reported last week that this gambling scandal, this ongoing court case was happening with this company, Papaya Gaming. It was kind of a bad look for so many top ESPN personalities to go out there and endorse this app without doing any due diligence on it. Mina Kimes has since deleted her tweet, issued an apology online. Laura Rutledge and Dan Orlovsky have also deleted their tweets about it. I think as of today, Kendrick Perkins is the only one that has remained steadfast in his endorsement of Solitaire Cash. And it just gets to like kind of a bigger picture item here of like, these ESPN personalities, or honestly any sports media personalities that have large platforms, are probably approached with this type of deal, marketing partnership relatively frequently. And at least the individuals involved in this case, I would say most of the time, decline those opportunities, right? Like I had not seen Mina Kimes, Laura Rutledge, or Dan Orlovsky advertise anything on their social media platforms, especially not something that would be kind of a sketchy real money gaming app like this was. So to me, what that said was
almost all of them are fraudulent. Like that's the other thing is it's
right.
Like I want to give them the benefit of the doubt that they just said yes to something, and if Stephen A. Smith's word is good, then it's good. It's not like he has stepped in this stuff often either. So I understand how you could get kind of just trapped in that, but like all of the stake and all these things tend to have legal challenges to them, even if they get out of the clear on it. It's just like why is this type of stuff even like rising to the level of an ESPN personality?
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's like this agreement, whatever marketing agreement was put forth in front of these people, must have been so much more lucrative than any other usual proposals that they're getting, that I think that in and of itself, knowing that this is like a weird solitaire cash gaming app, should have just raised red flags. Like when I saw this on Wednesday, I immediately was like, this shit stinks. Like this smells really funny. Like no one with this large of a platform should be advertising apps that like no one has ever heard of. So they must be getting paid a lot of money to do this. Why are they getting paid a lot of money to do this? Well, it turns out they're washing the company of some pretty unfavorable headlines. So I'm glad to see that 3 of the 4 of them have gone ahead and deleted these advertisements. Mina has come out and publicly apologized. I think that's the right thing to do, and it should just be a lesson for people that have such large platforms that you got to do your due diligence before just putting your name behind an app like this.
The other lesson is in 2025, people will catch you doing anything like this. It's not going to slip through the cracks the way that it may have in the past, where you could go do an appearance in your hometown during the off season of your sport that you covered. No one would ever hear about it or care who the owner of the business was. This is also, it's for our consumption. So we're going to consume it. And for a lot of people now on the internet, that means spending weirdly ungodly amounts of time researching it and then trying to nail you on it. So maybe a lesson learned for all of them. That'll wrap us up for Monday, November 10th. Hit follow or subscribe wherever you're finding us. We'll be back live on YouTube 2 more times this week. Believe we have an NFL announcer draft coming your way if all things go according to plan, and sports media will keep delivering crazy headlines. Keep up with all of it right here at awfulannouncing.com and across our social media platforms, and we will catch you next time.